Elvis fell in love with 14-year-old Priscilla Presley. What has been hidden until now.
Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was more than just a music icon. He embodied American culture, rebellion, and unmatched talent. For years, fans have admired his legacy. But beneath the surface lies a story few truly know. Recently uncovered evidence reveals shocking truths that challenge everything we thought we knew about him. And not all of it paints Elvis in a good light. Did he steal his iconic sound from black artists without giving credit? Was his relationship with Priscilla Presley rooted in manipulation? And what truly led to his tragic downfall? In this video, we dive deep into the controversies, secrets, and hidden history behind one of music's most legendary and complicated figures. The myth of originality shattered. For decades, Elvis Presley stood tall as the king of rock and roll, a man credited with revolutionizing popular music, blending country, blues, and gospel into a sound that electrified audiences around the world. To millions, he was the embodiment of raw, original talent, a young man from Tupelo who single-handedly changed the musical landscape. But behind that myth lies a more complicated, far less flattering reality. The image of Elvis as a musical innovator has been deeply challenged by modern historians, musicians, and cultural critics, many of whom argue that Presley's rise to fame came not from pure originality, but from borrowing or outright stealing the sound, style, and spirit of black artists who never received the credit or recognition they deserved. One of the most startling revelations came when researchers traced Presley's signature vocal style to a little-known black gospel and blues singer from Mississippi, whose name has all but vanished from history. According to interviews, archived recordings, and first-hand accounts, this forgotten artist was a regular presence on the Southern Circuit, where a young Elvis would have had ample opportunity to observe and absorb his performances. The mystery singer's voice, raw, emotive, and filled with the spiritual ache of gospel and the grit of the blues, bore a striking resemblance to the style that would later make Elvis famous. The most disturbing part of this picture is how small an amount of acknowledgement these influences got while Elvis lived. The media and music industry sold him as a revolutionary, as a white artist, introducing black sounds to mainstream America. Presley sometimes paid homage in his speeches to black musicians whom he admired, but the machinery around him worked hard to place him as original instead of imitative. Radio stations that refused to air black artists' records actively played Presley to afford their versions of the sounds a household and jukebox presence that the originals had been denied. It's not to say he lacked artistry. Elvis undoubtedly had charisma and later became a star in his own right, exuding magnetic stage presence and charm to connect with audiences. But the idea of him as a musical innovator, a lone genius who produced something completely new, collapses upon close inspection. In many ways, he was a channel through which the energy of black music flowed to the mainstream white America for a price. The inspired artists found themselves left out, deprived of the monetary rewards and cultural recognition that Presley availed himself of. This acknowledges some discomfort for modern musicians and historians. They note deliberately obscures the systemic racism behind the Elvis legend that put him in the spotlight while blocking others. They highlight that Presley's fame drew on the work of artists who never had the chance to compete on an equal playing field. Then, they go further. In order to understand the legacy of Presley, one must take into account his brilliance as well as the theft of culture that propelled him to stardom. The controversy over Elvis's sound was just the beginning. Soon, deeper, more unsettling truths surfaced, ones that cast doubt on the foundations of his most iconic relationship and revealed a far more complex and troubling side of the king of rock and roll than the world had ever seen. Elvis and Priscilla's love story. For generations, Fans saw Elvis and Priscilla Presley as the picture of a fairy tale romance. The rock and roll king who swept a young woman off her feet and brought her into his glittering world of fame and fortune. Their love story was immortalized in photos, headlines, and interviews, sold to the public as one of passion, devotion, and destiny. But behind the glossy surface of this iconic relationship was a reality far less romantic. Over time, and through Priscilla's own words, a far more troubling picture has emerged, one of control, manipulation, and a deep imbalance of power that left scars long after the cameras stopped flashing. Priscilla was just 14 years old when her story with Elvis began. A teenager living with her family in Germany, while Elvis was stationed there for military service. At the time, the significant age gap, he was 24, was largely ignored by the media, woven into the fantasy rather than seen as a cause for concern. "I liked Elvis, but not as fanatically as many of my girlfriends," Priscilla later reflected in her 1985 memoir, Elvis and Me. Ironically, when her father, Air Force officer Paul Beaulieu, received a new assignment in West Germany, she joked to her friends that she was headed there to meet the singer, who had recently been posted to the same region. Today, it would be almost unimaginable for parents to permit their 14-year-old daughter to dine at the home of the world's most famous rock star, a man 10 years older. Yet, that's exactly what unfolded after a chance encounter with one of Elvis's army friends led to Priscilla receiving the highly sought-after invitation. As she arrived, passing through a gate crowded with eager female fans hoping for an autograph, she later recalled in her memoir, now the inspiration for a new biopic, "I spotted Elvis immediately," describing the moment she first saw the man she would marry a decade later. For Priscilla Presley, life with Elvis meant growing up far too quickly. From a young age, she was expected to fit into the image that Elvis and his inner circle had created for her, an image shaped more by appearances than by personal growth. Her individuality was slowly overshadowed by the expectations of the man she loved. Many fans at the time didn't realize just how isolated her life truly was. Moving into Graceland may have seemed glamorous on the outside, but for Priscilla, it marked the beginning of a deep seclusion. Cut off from her friends, family, and the world beyond Elvis's reach, she found herself living in a gilded cage. Her identity, choices, and freedom were often dictated by Elvis, leaving little room for her to develop as a person. Behind the romance was a reality far more complicated and, at times, deeply confining. The birth of their daughter, Lisa Marie, briefly raised the hopes that their marriage would stand firm. In reality, though, it only complicated an already fine relationship bound up in all the strains of fame, insecurity, and unrealized expectations. Priscilla actually was the mother's role, with all these others part of the public impression the world saw. Inside Graceland, she was battling the isolation and the craving for self-determination that characterized her life with Elvis from the very beginning. This was a dynamic that simply could not hold. Finally, Priscilla made that painful decision to leave, not out of anger or bitterness, but because she needed to reclaim her identity and create a healthier life for herself and her daughter. Just as the truth about their marriage shattered long-held fantasies, another shadow loomed over Elvis's legacy. A hidden story of artistic appropriation that raised even deeper questions about the man behind the music, the influences behind his biggest hits. When fans think of Elvis Presley, they often picture the man who revolutionized music, the king of rock and roll, whose voice and style seemed entirely his own. But behind those chart-topping hits and iconic performances lies a murkier truth. As historians and music scholars have examined his career more closely, a pattern emerges. Many of the sounds, styles, and even vocal techniques that made Elvis famous were deeply shaped by artists who came before him, voices that often went uncredited and unsung while he rose to superstardom. One of the most surprising revelations comes from the connection between Elvis and a lesser-known singer named Jimmy Sweeney. Sweeney's smooth, versatile voice bore a striking resemblance to the style Elvis would later make famous. Early in his career, Elvis reportedly listened obsessively to Sweeney's recordings, absorbing his phrasing, tone, and subtle vocal inflections. In fact, some music insiders have suggested that Elvis modeled parts of his sound so closely on Sweeney that it blurred the line between inspiration and imitation. While Sweeney's contributions were largely forgotten by the general public, echoes of his style lived on in the very songs that catapulted Elvis to the top. An even more curious chapter in this story centers on the mysterious demo of a song called "Without You." The unusual thing about the recording was that nobody knew who the original singer was, only that the voice was so hauntingly good that it stunned even a young Elvis. According to accounts, Presley reportedly exclaimed, "I hate him! Why can't I sing like that?" The depth and control of that unknown voice set a standard that Elvis admired and, in his own way, chased for the rest of his career. While "Without You" was eventually set aside for material that better suited his own pipes, the impression left by that demo lingered, subtly shaping his vocal style. But Sweeney and the singer of the "Without You" mystery weren't Elvis's only hidden influences. By this time, long before Sweeney had made an appearance on the national stage, Elvis was already steeped in the musical traditions of the South. He grew up in an atmosphere of gospel, rhythm and blues and country sounds, modes of expression nurtured by black and working-class artists who often went unrecognized by the so-called mainstream. From church houses of worship to blues joints, these various sounds became part of the genetic composition of Elvis. His early performances drew energy, passion, and soul from the very traditions defined by these artists. Yet, when the young artist became famous, he did not get to hear much acknowledgement in the media or music industry regarding the influences of those who carved his style. Such a pattern was not completely incidental. The complex racial and cultural dynamics that underlie the music of the 1950s formed a nebula around Elvis and against which he acted. The artist, while embracing black musical forms, was marketed as wholesome and acceptable to wider, predominantly white audiences. Hits like "Hound Dog" and "That's All Right" are derivatives of many songs made well-known by black musicians, in whose case Big Mama Thornton and Arthur Crudup are also included. Yet it was Elvis's version that got extensive radio play, televised performances, and record sales. Between the two, the original performers enjoyed and often collected meager royalties or credit for their work. The success of the largest Elvis hits was inextricably tied to these trailblazers. Elvis himself wasn't blind to these influences. According to numerous reports, he was quite fond of and respectful toward the black musicians who inspired his sound. He was said to have spoken about their talent and importance. He even fought against claims that he was the creator of rock and roll. But the fame machinery, the record labels, promoters, and press redirected all the light on Elvis, while leaving the musical debt largely untold. Fans prefer to look at Elvis as a one-man music revolution, a genius on his own, instead of taking into account the multitude of artists who had once paved the path for such a success. And if those influences were hidden in plain sight, imagine what else was happening behind closed doors, especially when it came to the darker, more secretive sides of his personal life. The dark side of his fame. Elvis Presley's rise to the pinnacle of global stardom came with a price few outside his inner circle truly understood. For millions, he was the ultimate success story. A boy from humble beginnings who transformed into the king of rock and roll. But behind the glittering stage lights and adoring fans was a man increasingly trapped by the very fame that made him a legend. The darker side of Elvis's life, long hidden from public view, was marked by isolation, dependence, and a growing sense of disillusionment with the world he once dreamed of conquering. At the heart of Elvis's struggle was the suffocating nature of his celebrity. What began as a thrilling whirlwind of performances, tours, and record-breaking hits soon morphed into a relentless grind. His schedule was controlled by handlers, managers, and promoters who saw Elvis not as a man, but as a brand to be maximized at all costs. Every decision, from the songs he sang to the films he starred in, was carefully calculated to sustain the myth of Elvis Presley. Over time, this manufactured reality chipped away at his sense of self. The young man who had once been full of passion for music and performance became increasingly detached, living behind the walls of Graceland and shielded by a carefully curated image. This isolation practically made it impossible for Elvis to forge worthwhile connections. Friends from the early years were either purposely excluded from his life or else absorbed into his entourage, a group sometimes dubbed the Memphis Mafia. These guys were there for companionship, but also served as protectors, keeping everything away from Elvis through the vision of control and protection they chose. Priscilla Presley was one of the few who had known him almost intimately, and later said that there was this invisible line which prevented him from getting to his normal life. Though there would be many tender moments in their relationship, it would always be disturbed by Elvis's increasing inability to separate his public persona from his private self. The demands of fame created a distance between them, and they were truly heartbreaking for both. Maybe the most ghostly aspect of Elvis's concealed struggle was the increasing dependency on pharmaceutical substances. What started as a remedy to cope with the horrible rigors of his profession, to sleep, to wake up, to perform, had turned into a dangerous cycle of dependency. Rarely challenged, even by his publicists and hangers-on, who were only too eager to please him, was Elvis's rapid accumulation of pill use. Doctors who were handsomely on payroll would issue prescriptions without batting an eyelid. It was this very pattern that became highly injurious. The man who once lit up a concert with his energy became more subdued, suffering from both physical and emotional ill health. However, this side of Elvis was rarely, if ever, exposed to the public. On stage and on the screen, he remained the king, charming, dynamic, and larger than life. The cracks in the facade were meticulously concealed by his entourage as ardent fans continued to see only the legend. Yet, the burden was all too real inside those four walls. Elvis had become a prisoner of his fame, a man entangled in the web of expectations he could no longer meet without sacrificing his own well-being. The weight of this hidden life would ultimately strain not just Elvis, but the marriage that once seemed unbreakable. When the fairy tale fell apart, Elvis and Priscilla Presley's marriage was, for many, the final act in the storybook romance that had captivated the world. But as the years passed, the pressures of public life, the demands of fame, and the weight of personal struggles began to take a toll that no amount of charm or media gloss could hide. Graceland, once seen as the castle of their shared fairy tale, became the backdrop for growing distance and quiet heartbreak. The strain of constant public attention, combined with the expectations placed on both of them to embody an ideal, created a reality that was far removed from the fantasy sold to fans. Elvis spent so much of his time and energy on his career that there wasn't enough left to nurture the relationship that had once brought him and Priscilla together. As it was, the rigors of touring and recording and looking good in public left Priscilla mostly to fend for herself at Graceland, taking care of their home and the burdensome notoriety of being married to one of the world's most famous men. Cracks began to emerge through no special instance, but rather the cumulative effect of years of unmet emotional needs, missed opportunities for connecting, and fame, which shut them away from each other. Decades later, Priscilla reflectively said during an interview for The Weekly in 2022, I loved him very, very much. He cared for me and loved me very, very much. But to live the life of someone that famous is not easy. I don't know of too many people who could live that life. And it's difficult to share someone that is so famous. These words revealed how deeply complex the feelings actually were behind the very public aspect of their lives. The truth, hidden for so long beneath the glittering surface. And thus, slowly came this realization that whatever love had been, it could no longer hold such heavy stones. Their separation marked in letters not just the end of the marriage, but a crumbling of the illusion. A reminder that even public lives so glittering are cast under shadows by private tears. Priscilla put it this way: you're always trying to find a place of solace, and to get away to learn and grow and be who you are searching for. Elvis and Priscilla's particular separation was the turning point that ushered in the more somber, contemplative chapters that lay ahead in the life of the king. And as the marriage crumbled, so too did the illusion of a perfect life at Graceland, setting the stage for the heartbreaking final chapters of Elvis's story. The final days. Elvis Presley's final days have long been the subject of fascination, rumor, and sorrow. To the public, he was still the king, larger than life, an icon whose voice and charisma had shaped an entire generation. But behind the closed doors of Graceland, a different picture was unfolding. As the 1970s drew to a close, Elvis's health, both physical and emotional, was in steep decline. And while fans packed arenas and clamored for a glimpse of their idol, few understood how fragile he had become. The secrets of his final days reveal a man struggling against forces he could no longer control, forces that ultimately led to his untimely death. By the mid-1970s, the toll of years of relentless performing, personal heartbreak, and prescription substance dependency was undeniable. Elvis's once slender frame had filled out, his face puffier and eyes often tired. Reports from those close to him describe a man increasingly trapped by his own routine, unable to sleep without medication, unable to function without stimulants, caught in a cycle that eroded his vitality. Graceland, once a place of refuge, had become a kind of gilded cage. Elvis rarely left his grounds in his final months, retreating deeper into isolation while the world outside still clamored for the king of rock and roll. Even though his health was deteriorating, Elvis kept pushing himself as much as he could to keep up appearances. He continued to travel across the country to perform nightly performances that, while obviously stressed by the demand, still managed to get his die-hard fans ecstatic. The real story was told to those who were closest to him, however. Rehearsals are now shorter, with no new songs added between shows. Friends and staff are now whispering about his issues, but either don't have the will or haven't the ability to intervene meaningfully. The myth of Elvis, the invincible, untouchable superstar, made it hard for anyone to ever really reach him with help that could soak through the walls he built around himself. The secrecy surrounding his health was not just about protecting Elvis's privacy. It was also about preserving the image that had made him a legend. For those managing his career, the stakes were high. The world wanted to see the king, not a man in decline. And so, much of the reality of Elvis's condition was hidden from public view. Only those closest to him witnessed the long nights, the moments of confusion, the desperate attempts to regain control over a body and mind that were betraying him. They saw the emotional weight he carried, the heartbreak over his failed marriage, the distance between him and the normal life he often said he wanted but could never have. Elvis suspected, in the last weeks, how precarious his situation was. Sometimes he spoke of wanting to slow down, take a breather, and concentrate on his health. At different times, he would express dreams of filmmaking again, of perhaps finding a quieter way forward. But these dreams were tempered by the dreadful reality of having to face obligations to his fans, to his legacy, and to the machinery that had built him up, and now, in many ways, depended on him to stay alive. The few people who tried to help were faced with the bitter truth that Elvis was on an irreversible road, effectively rendered useless, or on the outskirts of his life. People were shocked when Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977, but his decline was nothing new for those who had witnessed it. Elvis was found unresponsive in the bathroom of Graceland, and the cause of death was officially noted as heart failure. However, the true reason was the wear and tear of physical and emotional suffering through the years. Those last days were filled with more than just medications and sleepless nights. They were steeped in solitude, pressure, and the unbearable burden of being Elvis Presley. Presley died, and with him, more than mortality, it was a tragedy of a life that had suffered an undignified amount of torment. And in the wake of that loss, questions lingered, not only about the man himself, but about what could have been done differently. What if Elvis had found the strength to break free from the expectations that bound him? What if those closest to him had intervened sooner? The legacy tainted. For decades, Elvis Presley has symbolized talent, charisma, and the rise of rock and roll. His voice, style, and stage presence forever changed music history, making him an icon whose influence still echoes today. Elvis wasn't just a performer, he was a cultural revolution that redefined entertainment. His legacy shaped music, culture, and generations of fans who saw him as the ultimate American success story, the poor boy who rose to become the king. But with time, research, confessions, and long-hidden truths have begun to complicate that legacy. What we know now reveals a far more tangled and unsettling picture, one that forces us to rethink the man behind the legend and how the choices he made, and those made for him, shaped history in ways we weren't meant to see. One of the most troubling revelations is how heavily Elvis relied on borrowed influences, sometimes without acknowledgement, to build the sound that made him a superstar. While it's long been understood that he drew inspiration from gospel, blues, and rhythm and blues, deeper investigation has shown just how often Elvis's success was built on the uncredited contributions of Black artists who never received the recognition or rewards their work deserved. The voice, the swagger, the very foundation of his musical style, so much of it was shaped by artists whose names were pushed aside in favor of Presley's marketable image. Compounding this has been the role of his management, most particularly Colonel Tom Parker. What we know now about Parker's bearing down on Elvis's career shows a picture of manipulation and exploitation. Parker was not just steering Elvis to success, he was deeply controlling all the films he made, the exhaustive touring schedules that ripped him up, everything. Elvis longed to break out and expand his own artistic horizons, but Parker never allowed him out of a formula that put profits before art. The secrecy surrounding business decisions, those one-sided contracts where Elvis had to sign, and the refusal to let him tour internationally when he might have thrived. Every last one of those choices tarnished his legacy and revealed how much of his potential was squandered by greed and short-sightedness. That, then, is the painful reality of Elvis's personal decline, camouflaged for these many years behind the glittering facade of his image. Its dependency on prescription substances, isolation, emotional upheaval, all of it hidden from the public eye. What his fans made out was that great performer in sequined jumpsuits, that man who could still rock the stage. What they did not see was the cost. Sleepless nights, health crises, desperate efforts to keep up the facade of the king. Today, with insights into how this condition was enabled or ignored around him, we're left facing the fallout of that legacy, blighted by negligence and missed opportunities for intervention. If this video changed how you view Elvis Presley, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more in-depth looks at the hidden truths behind music legends. Share your thoughts in the comments. What surprised you the most about Elvis's story? Was it something you never expected or a detail you'd never heard before? We love hearing your reactions and theories. And if you're hungry for more, don't miss the next video now playing on your screen. It's packed with untold stories and shocking facts that will challenge everything you thought you knew about the icons of music history. Join us as we uncover the myths, mysteries, and moments that shaped the greatest legends of all time.